Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Heroes in a half shell. Turtle power.
Hey Turtle Collectors, CJ here with another video blog for prototypes. Today we're going to talk about hard copies. So first a little bit of a background. When they first start to make a figure, the first thing they do in 3 dimensions is the actual sculpt, which is usually in a form of wax. Those waxes are very, very fragile. So they need to make a version that's much more robust for a number of reasons. First, they need to have something to send to the factory to make the tooling off of. And then secondly, they need usually 2 or 3 pieces for painting up, for catalog photography, to take to toy fair, salesman samples, things like that. So what they'll do is they'll basically replicate the sculpt by making a mold out of it and then pouring a really hard resin into it. And this is what makes the hard copy, because it's really, really hard like rock. So I'll talk about sculpts and molding a different day, but today we're just going to focus on the hard copies. So as my example here today, I've got Dwarf Don. Now if you look really close at this guy, you will notice there are some minor differences to the final sculpt. And that's because this is a hard copy off the clay. So a clay is actually an earlier stage than even the sculpt. It's sort of like the rough. It's like they sort of rough it out and then take the clay and mold it just like they would a hard copy, and sometimes they'll make hard copies out of the clay. So I'll explain that again when we get to sculpting. When I'll talk about clays and sculpting. But suffice it to say, this is pretty much your typical type of hard copy, whether it came off the final wax or the final or the preliminary clay. It's still pretty similar, other than maybe just sometimes they're missing some details. But you can see these are pinned together. You can see the pin there, pinhole. Okay, so this is a hard, solid chunk of material. This is not hollow like your production figures are hollow and have a seam down the middle, and you customizers will know you split that seam open and you can take the figures apart. This is not like that. It's solid all the way through, so it's quite heavy. Actually, I've got a scale right here. Let's see how heavy this one is. So I don't know what a typical figure is, but just for comparison, put this guy on my scale, and he's about, get him in the picture there, you can see there, a little under 6 ounces. I'm guessing that maybe a production figure is probably 2 ounces or so, would be my guess. But anyway, quite heavy. If you put one in side by side in your hand with production, you would absolutely know which one was which, because the production figure is way lighter. So you can see the head is also pinned together. Now, a lot of times, and on most lines actually, other than Ninja Turtles, the legs would also be pinned. But Ninja Turtles had this unique hip joint, as you all probably know, with the legs, with the little hip joint that is the little round ball socket that helped the legs move. So probably most of the hard copies for the Ninja Turtle lines, they actually took these parts. This is probably a production part right off the plastic tool in China, like a part that would normally be used on a production figure, but instead they sent a bunch of them over to the artist shops that were making these hard copies, and they would actually embed them right into the resin mold when they molded them. So that way they could just snap the legs on, and these pegs were way more robust than a hard copy. Now these are fragile, especially these little tiny parts, so if you ever get one, be very, very careful of the thin areas. But this piece right here, not very fragile. If I dropped it on the carpet, it would not hurt it at all. If I dropped it from 5 feet onto concrete, yeah, it could easily break it, snap it. So they're good. It's good to handle them carefully, but you don't have to use like ridiculous measures like you would with the sculpt, which is extremely fragile and will break just by moving things around. So what they would use these for, I'm trying to get the leg back on. So one like this, an unpainted one, would go to the tooling shop, and they would use this. They put it in a machine. They have a little needle that traces over it, and then over here there's another. It sort of translate the motion to a drill bit, drill down into the tooling. Or there's another process called EDM, but I'm not going to get into the technical details about that. But suffice it to say, they would use these to make these steel tools that would make the production figure. So finally, there's what they do is what's called paint masters, where they would paint these up and use them for photography. I'll show a little bit about that another day. So hope everybody's still staying safe out there. Keep learning, keep collecting. See you next time.
Mutant